pace away with his boot, looked down at the 25-year-old woman he had already decided was nobody, and said loud enough for the entire range to hear that she had 10 seconds to get off his range before he had her arrested for impersonating a soldier. Nobody moved. Nobody objected. 30 men watched. And Ren Calloway didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't reach for the weapon. She simply turned her forearm toward the light and let him read what was written there. Drop the city you're watching from in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay with me to the very end, because what happened after that forearm turned is not what a single one of those 30 men was prepared for. Senior Chief Elias Boone had run the long-range course at Camp Blackthorn for 11 years, and before that, he had spent 24 in the Navy doing work that still didn't appear on any record anyone was allowed to request. I was 63 years old. He had stopped being impressed by people somewhere around 1998. So when he walked out to open the range at row 512 and found a woman already sitting at the far firing position, the first thing he felt was irritation. The second thing he felt about 4 seconds later was something colder and much harder to name. She was young. That registered immediately. 25 maybe, honey gold hair pulled back into a long, wavy ponytail, an olive green tee camouflage trousers, boots that had been broken in by somebody who walked a lot and complained about it, never. Her build was the build of a person who trains because the training keeps them alive, not because a mirror asked her to. And she was wearing nothing. No rank on her collar, no unit tab, no ribbons, no warfare device, no qualification badge, no name tape. On the base where every stitch of fabric on every man's chest was a sentence in an autobiography. This woman was a blank page. That wasn't the part that made Boone stop walking. The part that made him stop walking was her hands. She was cleaning a bolt carrier, and she wasn't doing it the way a young sailor does. It careful checking her own work, glancing down at each step, like she was afraid of getting it wrong. She wasn't doing it the way a show-off does it, either fast and loose, making noise with the metal so people would look. She was doing it the way a person does something they have done 10,000 times in the dark, in the rain, in cold, that cracks skin in places where getting it wrong doesn't get you corrected. It gets you killed. Her fingers found each surface without her eyes going there first. Her wrists never adjusted. There was no wasted motion anywhere in her body. Boone had seen hands like that exactly 4 times in 35 years. 3 of those people were dead. He kept walking because he had a range to open and because a man his age had learned not to build a cathedral out of the first brick he found. He set up the log. He checked the target monitors. He told himself she was probably attached to some support unit, probably had authorization sitting in a file somewhere, probably nothing. Then at 0540, the junior officers started arriving, and Boone understood that probably nothing was going to be a very short-lived theory. They noticed her the way a room notices a stranger. First 1 head turned, then 3, then all of them. And because they were young and confident and standing in a place where they had never once been the least qualified person present, they didn't lower their voices. One of them wondered aloud whether she was somebody's girlfriend who'd gotten past the gate. Another suggested she'd wandered off the recreational range and gotten lost. A third took out his phone, held it low against his thigh, and took a photograph of her back. Not to report anything, just to have it, just to send it to somebody with a joke attached. Ren Calloway didn't turn around. That was the second thing that bothered Boone, because she had heard them. He knew she had heard them because when the phone came up, her chin had moved maybe 2 degrees. The smallest possible acknowledgement that something had entered her awareness and been assessed and been categorized as harmless. Not ignored, processed. Boone had spent decades learning the difference between a person who doesn't notice and a person who notices everything and simply doesn't spend anything on it. At 0603, Lieutenant Cole Ashford walked onto the range and the temperature of the whole morning changed. Ashford was 34 sharp, well-regarded, and second in command to Rear Admiral Dane Kessler. He was the kind of officer who understood that authority is a performance and had gotten very good at the performance. He looked at the woman at the end of the range for a long moment, and Boone watched him do something that most people would have missed entirely. He checked her forearms, not her face, not her uniform, her forearms. A quick, precise, professional flick of the eyes and then away, and then back, and then a stillness in his shoulders that lasted about 1.5 seconds too long. Boone filed it. He didn't know what it meant yet. He knew it meant something. Ashford walked over to him and asked quietly who she was. Boone said he didn't know. Ashford asked whether she was cleared. Boone said he'd checked the log. And Ashford said, still quietly, still perfectly pleasant, that he'd appreciate it if Boone checked the log right now, and there was something underneath the pleasantness that Boone couldn't identify but immediately disliked. It wasn't command presence. It was closer to a man asking a question he was afraid of the answer to. Then at Joe 615, Rear Admiral Dane Kessler came through the gate with an entourage, and everything that had been quietly wrong about the morning turned loud. Kessler was 58. He had been a genuinely exceptional operator once, and he had been told he was exceptional for so long afterward that he had lost the ability to recognize the quality in anyone who didn't already look like a smaller version of himself. He commanded respect because he had earned it 2 decades ago, and because nobody at Camp Blackthorn had ever been in a position to ask him what he had earned lately. He saw Wren in under 3 seconds. His eyes went face, shoulders, collar sleeve, the 4-point scan every senior officer runs without thinking, and found nothing at every stop. And then he smiled. Boone watched that smile happen and felt his stomach drop because he had seen that exact smile on that exact face before, and it never once preceded anything good. It was the smile of a man who has finished the story before opening the book. Kessler glanced back at his officers. The look he gave them lasted half a second and needed no translation whatsoever. Watch this. He walked down the line toward her, unhurried, with the stride of a man who has never in his life had to consider whether a space belonged to him. He stopped 6 feet away and said, "Good morning." She didn't look up. He said it again louder. The officers behind him went quiet in the particular way a crowd goes quiet when it senses that the entertainment is starting. Wren finished seating the component in her hand, set it down, and looked up. And the first thing Kessler noticed, the thing that pulled his smile a half-inch tighter, was that she wasn't scared. She wasn't scrambling to her feet. She wasn't apologizing. She looked at him the way you look at a person who has interrupted something you were handling perfectly well without them. "What's your rank?" he asked. "I'm cleared to be on this range, sir." "That's not what I asked you." "No, sir, it isn't." Somebody behind Kessler laughed, one short bark, cut off fast when nobody joined in. Kessler tilted his head. He asked her again, slower, the way you speak to a person you have decided is either stupid or lying. And Wren Calloway set both hands flat on her thighs, looked him directly in the eye, and told him in a voice that was completely level that she wasn't currently displaying a rank. The laughter came then, properly rolling forward from the back of the group. "Not currently displaying a rank." Somebody repeated it. Somebody else suggested she'd left it in her other trousers. Ashford didn't laugh. Boone noticed that too. Kessler let it run for exactly as long as it served him, then raised a hand and shut it off. He asked her whether she understood where she was standing. She named the range, the qualification designation, and the authorization category correctly in 11 words. He asked who used this range. She said senior operators and special qualification personnel. He asked what she thought she was going to do with that rifle. She said she was going to shoot it. He asked at what distance. And Wren looked past him down the length of the range to the markers that sat so far out they blurred into the pale morning haze at the very end of the lane, the ones nobody at Camp Blackthorn had put steel on in 4 years. 1,400 meters, sir." Nobody laughed right away. The number sat in the air for 1 full second, completely alone, and every man on that range heard it land. Then it broke, and the laughter that came was worse than the first round, because the first round had been dismissal, and this one was joy. One lieutenant turned away entirely, shoulders shaking. Another pressed his fist against his mouth. Somebody said she was serious, and somebody else said that was the best part. And Kessler stopped smiling. That was the moment it turned. Boone saw it happen, and he had time to think very clearly, "Don't," and then it was already happening. Because Kessler had come out here to enjoy himself in front of his officers, and instead of shrinking, she had held her ground, and instead of apologizing, she had given him a number that made him look like a man arguing with someone who wasn't taking him seriously. And Dane Kessler had not been made to feel small in front of subordinates in 19 years, and had lost every callous he'd ever had for it. He stepped forward and took the rifle out of her hands. He didn't ask. He didn't warn her. He reached down, closed his fist around the handguard, and pulled it out of her grip, and she let it go. Because the alternative was a physical struggle with a flag officer in front of 30 witnesses, and she had already run that calculation before his hand ever moved. He threw it on the ground. The sound it made was small and flat and absolutely obscene, and the entire range heard it, and 30 men who had been laughing 4 seconds earlier stopped laughing all at once. He kicked the case aside. Then he looked down at her and said it. "Pick that up and get off my range before I have you arrested for impersonating a soldier." Nobody moved. Boone would think about that afterward for a long time. Not what Kessler did, but what the 30 of them did, which was nothing. 30 decorated officers watched a flag officer physically strip a weapon out of a woman's hands and throw it in the dirt over a question she had answered honestly, and not one of them said a word. Ren Calloway stayed exactly where she was. She looked at the rifle on the ground. She looked back up at Kessler, and when she spoke, her voice didn't rise a single decibel, which somehow made it carry further than shouting would have. "Sir, that's not my rifle, it's the range's. Serials in Senior Chief Boone's log." A beat. "You just threw government property on the deck in front of 30 witnesses. I'm not going to be the one who picks it up." The silence that followed was the ugliest sound Boone had heard in 11 years on that range. Kessler's jaw moved. He was recalibrating. Boone could see it, the micro-adjustment, the reassessment, the sudden internal awareness that he had swung at something and missed, and that everyone had watched him miss. A man with a different temperament would have stepped back right there. Kessler stepped forward. He'd told her she was going to shoot. Right now, 1,400 meters, since that was the number she'd been so confident about. And when she failed, he was going to walk her to the gate personally and have her escorted off the installation, and then he was going to find out exactly who had authorized her onto his range and end that person's career. Ashford said, "Sir." Kessler said one word, "No." And Ren Calloway did the thing that nobody on that range expected. She stood up. She picked up the rifle herself, unhurried, checking the receiver in the optic mount with 2 quick passes of her fingers for damage from the fall, and walked to the firing line. Boone felt it then, the first real warning, the one that came from the base of his spine and not from his head. Because here is what happens to people when they are publicly humiliated. It goes into the body. The shoulders climb, the jaw sets. The steps get either too fast or too heavy. You can read it on anyone, always without exception. She walked like there was nobody else on the range at all. She set up with no wasted motion whatsoever. She checked the optic. She confirmed her zero. She read the wind off a strip of orange fabric on a stake, low-tech, unglamorous, in the fastest method there is if you actually know how to read it. And she read it once from 3 positions along the lane and did not look again. Ashford had his arms crossed. He said something to the officer beside him about how this was going to be difficult to watch. The other man agreed. Then the range officer called it, and the whole line went quiet, and Ren Calloway settled into position, and Boone stopped breathing. Because she went still, not rigid, not braced. There is a difference between a body being held in place and a body finding level. And what Boone was looking at was the second one, the stillness of a nervous system that had been trained over years in conditions most people never survive to slow down at the precise moment everyone else's speeds up. Then the breathing started. 4 counts in. Boone turned around very slowly. 4 counts held. He stared at her back. 4 counts out. And his hands went cold because that pattern was not taught in basic marksmanship, and it was not taught in advanced marksmanship, and it was not in any curriculum available to any sailor at Camp Blackthorn. It had been developed for long-range operators working alone in environments where heart rate had to be governed manually because absolutely nothing else, not the wind, not the light, not the distance, not the man walking toward your position, was under your control. He had seen it 4 times in 35 years. 3 of those people were dead. The 4th one had never officially existed. The shot broke. It wasn't loud the way people expect. It was a tight, disciplined crack. Sound of a round leaving a barrel with complete intention behind it. 1,400 meters downrange, the monitor took its time. 1 second. 2. 10. Center. Nobody said anything. Kessler looked at the monitor, then at the rifle, then at the back of her head. "Well." "Again," he said. "Second shot. 10. Third shot. 10. Somewhere behind Kessler, an officer said, 'What?' very quietly to nobody. 4th shot. 10. And now the laughter wasn't just gone, it had been replaced by something with weight. The specific, unbearable silence that fills a space when 30 people have the same thought at the same moment and every single one of them would rather chew glass than say it out loud. Fifth shot. 10. 5 rounds, 5 centers, 1,400 meters in a crosswind that had shifted twice during the string with a service rifle she had never fired before that morning and standard issue ammunition out of a sealed can that Boone himself had opened. Kessler walked to the equipment station and picked up the inspection log. "Check it," he said. "All of it." They checked it. They checked the rifle standard configuration, no custom barrel work, no illegal modification, nothing on that weapon that wasn't on 40 others in the armory. They checked the ammunition's same lot number as every other shooter on the range that week. They checked the optic, the mount, the torque values, the distance markers, the target monitors, and the range calibration itself. Everything was exactly what it was supposed to be, which meant that what had just happened was exactly what it had looked like. Boone watched Kessler absorb that, and what he saw on the Admiral's face was not embarrassment and not anger. It was something more complicated and much more dangerous, the expression of a man looking at a fact that has broken his model of the world and who has not yet decided what to replace the model with and who is therefore capable of almost anything in the next 60 seconds. Kessler set the log down. "That was luck," he said, and Elias Boone, who had kept his mouth shut through 4 years of this man's command and had planned to keep it shut for 2 more until retirement, heard himself say, "No, sir, it wasn't." Kessler turned, slowly. Boone had chosen his moments carefully his entire career. He understood exactly what this one was going to cost him. He said it anyway. "I've run this range 11 years. I've seen luck. Luck is one shot. Luck doesn't hold a win call through 5 rounds at 1,400 meters." He looked at Kessler directly. "What I just watched was somebody who's done that under conditions that would have taken most of the men standing here apart." Ashford stepped in, immediately saying that was a significant statement to make about a woman who hadn't produced a single piece of identification. And Boone said, without looking at him, that she didn't owe the lieutenant an explanation. The bluntness of it stopped Ashford cold, and Boone caught again that flicker. Not offense, something underneath offense. Ashford's eyes went to her forearms one more time, and this time they stayed there half a second longer, and this time Boone was watching for it and saw the man's throat move. Wren was already clearing the rifle. Same economy of motion. Same complete indifference to the fact that the entire structure of authority on that range had just been rearranged around her, and she was standing in the middle of it. Kessler walked back to her. "You'll be here tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question. "If I'm needed, sir. You'll be here, 0800, full qualification. New distance, my choosing." He stepped closer and his voice dropped, and every man on that range leaned in without meaning to. "And you will tell me who you are." Ren Calloway held his eyes for exactly 1 second longer than a person of lower rank should have. "Yes, sir." She picked up her case and walked off the range. Nobody spoke until she was completely out of sight. Then Ashford said to no one, "Who the hell is she?" And Boone said nothing at all because he was working very hard not to remember a story that had never officially existed. There was a legend, not a documented one, nothing that had ever appeared in a briefing or a declassified summary or an authorized history. The kind of thing that lives only in the space between official records passed between men who have been in dark places, always beginning with "I heard" and never once ending in a citation. The legend was about a program, 3 years no name, only a designator and a call sign, Night Glass. Nobody who worked it talked about what it did. The missions didn't exist. The outcomes were referenced only in bureaucratic language: objective, achieve threat, neutralize, asset recovered. And then, according to the legend, the whole thing ended the way those things always end, in an operation that officially never happened in a country most people can't find on a map, with an asset who went off the net and never came back. No body, no confirmed death, declared missing. Then quietly 11 months later, declared dead. Boone spent 30 minutes at his station telling himself he was being ridiculous. There were other shooters who could do what she'd done. There were other women in the service trained to that level. The breathing pattern was distinctive, yes, but distinctive isn't unique. It could have been taught to her by someone. It could have been developed independently. It meant nothing. He did not convince himself, and the reason he did not convince himself was sitting in the bottom of his chest like a stone. The sleeve. On the 4th shot, when she'd adjusted her support hand, her sleeve had ridden up on the inside of her left forearm, maybe an inch. maybe less. And Boone, who had been standing at the wrong angle and had not been looking for it, had caught the very edge of something. Dark lines, not decorative, something with structure to it, something that looked for a quarter of a second like it might have had numbers underneath. He hadn't seen enough to confirm anything. He couldn't stop seeing it anyway. He put down the clipboard and walked to the operations center. Every person authorized onto that range had a clearance entry. He pulled the day's list and scrolled until he found it, a single additional authorization added at 0431, 90 minutes before his own shift started by an origin field he had never seen populated in 11 years. The code was 5 characters, alphanumeric. It didn't match a base format. It didn't match a unit designator. It didn't match any Navy authorization schema he had access to, and Boone had access to a great deal more than his pay grade suggested. He wrote it down. He stared at it for a while. Then he picked up the phone and called the one man alive he trusted enough to ask a question he was afraid of. It rang 4 times. He said he needed something one. He said it was a range clearance code that wasn't in any format he recognized. There was a pause on the line, the specific quality of pause that happens when someone has stopped doing whatever else they were doing. He was asked where he'd gotten it. He said off his own access log that morning. He was asked who it belonged to, and Boone hesitated because that was the entire problem. And then he said that was what he was trying to find out. He sent the code. The line went quiet for 41 seconds. When the voice came back, it was different, lower, careful in a way it hadn't been before. It asked him where exactly he had seen this. My range, this morning. She's gone now. Silence. Then she. Female, 25 maybe. Long blonde hair tied back. No rank displayed. Olive shirt, camouflage trousers, no name tape, nothing. The longest silence yet. Then the voice on the other end, barely above a whisper, asked whether she had been carrying a long-range rifle. Boone's hand tightened on the phone. Yes. And 5 for 5, 1,400 meters, all center. He heard breathing on the other end, slow, deliberate breathing from a man managing something. Then his first name, which nobody used, which meant this had stopped being a favor. Elias, listen to me very carefully. Do not ask anybody on that base about her. Not the Admiral, not your own people, not anyone until you hear from me. Boone said that wasn't much to go on. The voice said he knew. Boone asked for one thing, anything. There was a pause. Then the voice asked him if he remembered the story, the one from 3 years ago, the one nobody was supposed to talk about. Boone's stomach went down through the floor. He said he remembered it. That code you sent me, the voice said. It's the same classification tier. And then the line went dead. Boone sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the operations center for a long time. Not proof, not a name, not a confirmation. A thread. And a thread that ran toward a place he was increasingly certain he already knew the shape of. He thought about the way she had held the rifle. He thought about the breathing. He thought about the edge of dark lines on the inside of a forearm. He thought about a program that had never existed and an asset who had never come home. And then he thought about something else, something that had been sitting quietly at the back of his skull since 0603 that morning, and now walked all the way to the front and sat down. Ashford checked her forearms. Before anyone else had looked at anything but her collar, Lieutenant Cole Ashford, second in command of Camp Blackthorn, had checked the inside of a stranger's forearms. You only look there if you already know what might be there. Boone stood up so fast his chair rolled back into the wall. 2 buildings away in officers' quarters. Cole Ashford sat on the edge of his bunk with his phone in both hands and had not moved in 11 minutes. He had come off that range and gone straight back to his room without speaking to anyone, which was already unlike him, and he had locked the door, which was completely unlike him, and now he was looking at a message thread he had been told to delete after every single exchange, and had twice out of some instinct he still couldn't explain, failed to delete. He knew what night glass was. Not officially, not from any briefing. He knew it the way senior officers know things they were never meant to through the edges of conversations that stopped when he entered a room through the careful silence of men who knew more than they were willing to show. He also knew, and this was the part that was making his hands unsteady, that 11 weeks ago a man he had trusted for 6 years had sat across from him in a completely ordinary conversation about scheduling, and had mentioned in exactly the same tone he had used to discuss maintenance rotations that Ashford's wife and daughters were somewhere he thought about often. Ashford had not been able to move. 16 years in uniform, 2 combat deployments, trained for pressure until pressure was supposed to be a language he spoke fluently. And he had sat in a chair and been unable to make his own legs work. He had gone home that night and told his wife the water lines at the house had failed and she should take the girls to her sister's for a couple of weeks. That had been 78 days ago. The girls were still there. His wife thought the plumbing had gotten complicated. She had called him on Sunday to ask, laughing, whether he was ever going to fix the house or whether she should just enroll the kids in school out there. He had laughed too. He had gotten off the phone and then sat in his truck in the parking lot for 40 minutes. And this morning, a woman with no rank and no name had walked onto his commanding officer's range, and Ashford had looked at her forearms before he looked at her face, because there was only one thing in the world he had been dreading for 78 days, and it was somebody arriving who couldn't be explained. He opened the thread. Yeah. He typed 4 words, deleted them, typed them again. Someone is on base. His thumb hovered over send for 19 seconds. Then he closed the phone, put it face down on the mattress, and pressed both hands over his eyes, because he had just understood something, and the understanding was worse than anything the message could have accomplished. If she was who he was afraid she was, then she hadn't wandered onto that range. She had chosen it, which meant she had chosen this base, which meant she had chosen him. At 2140 in the flag suite, Dane Kessler was reading a scorecard. He had told himself he was doing paperwork. He had done no paperwork. He had been sitting with the range printout in front of him for an hour and 40 minutes, and he had gone through it so many times that he had started to see the columns when he closed his eyes. It wasn't the 10 rings that were bothering him. He had made his peace with the 10 rings somewhere around 1500 in the ugly private way. A proud man makes peace with being publicly wrong by deciding that it changed the facts about her and nothing at all about him. It was the second column, the environmental log, wind recorded automatically at 4 points along the lane, timestamped to the 10th of a second. Her first shot had gone down range at 0648.12, and the wind at the 100-meter station had shifted 11 degrees at 064809. 3 seconds before she fired. There was no possible way she had read that shift from the firing line. The flag at that station wasn't visible from her position. Kessler knew that because he had personally approved the layout, and she hadn't corrected after the first round because there had been nothing to correct. The first round was already center, which meant she had not reacted to the shift. She had predicted it, off the terrain, off the thermal timing, off something she had read walking up to the line, and calculated forward the way you do when you have spent years in places where the wind you shoot in is the wind that hasn't happened yet. Kessler set the paper down very slowly. He had spent 31 years around the best shooters this country produces. He had trained some of them. He had buried a few. He had never met anyone who could do that. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he did something he had not done since he made flag rank. He opened a secure terminal and typed a name into a personnel query. Except he didn't have a name. He had a description and a clearance code, and he entered the code, and the system took 9 seconds. 9 when a normal query returns in under 1, and then returned a single line of text. It did not say no record found. It said query logged, notification sent. Kessler stared at that for a long moment. He had just been informed by his own network on his own base that his attempt to identify a woman standing on his own range had been reported to somebody, and that somebody was not him. At 0247, Elias Boone gave up on sleeping and went back to the range office, because there was one decision left to make, and he wanted to make it alone. Kessler had ordered a full qualification at a distance of his own choosing. He hadn't specified. That meant it fell to the range chief, which meant it fell to Boone, which meant that in about 4 hours, a woman was going to walk back onto that line and find whatever number Boone put in the log. He sat with the pen in his hand for a long time. If he was wrong about her, if she was a very good shooter, having a very good morning, then a harder distance would prove it fast and mercifully, and she'd go home and Kessler would get his moment in life at Camp Blackthorn would go back to being what it was. If he was right, then no number he could write was going to be a problem. He wrote 600 meters in the range log and closed it. Then he sat back and admitted to himself the thing he had been avoiding for 19 hours. I was not setting a test, he was sending a signal. He was writing a number that no ordinary shooter would accept and no ordinary shooter could survive. And he was doing it because he wanted to know, and because some part of him, the part that had been in uniform for 35 years and had watched a great many good men walk into rooms they shouldn't have needed to know before Kessler did. He locked the office and stepped outside, and that was when he saw her. Ren Calloway was standing at the fence line on the east side of the installation in the dark, in an olive shirt and camouflage trousers, with her ponytail pulled through the back of a plain cap, and she was not warming up, and she was not walking a lane, and she was not doing a single thing a shooter does the night before a qualification. She was standing perfectly still, with her back to the range she was supposed to care about, looking at the officers' quarters, specifically, and Boone counted the windows twice to be certain, and then counted them a third time because he wanted very badly to be wrong. She was looking at the third window from the end, Cole Ashford's window. Boone stood in the dark for a long moment with his heart going hard against his ribs. Then he understood all at once and completely the thing he had been circling for 19 hours. She had not come to Camp Blackthorn to shoot. She had come to Camp Blackthorn for somebody, and the shooting was simply the price of admission, a way to be seen by exactly the right people without ever once having to explain herself to the wrong ones. The rifle wasn't her mission. The rifle was her cover. And 30 decorated officers had spent their morning laughing at a woman who had walked into their house on purpose, without a name, without a rank, without a single thing on her uniform to warn them, and had let them laugh because being underestimated was the whole point. Boone did not go back to his quarters. He stood at the edge of his own range in the cold, watching a 25-year-old woman watch a lieutenant's window, and he understood with the flat, unarguable certainty of a man who has been doing this for 35 years that when the sun came up over Camp Blackthorn, nothing on that installation was going to be the same again. She flew out of Phoenix at 1742 on a commercial ticket bought 90 minutes earlier under a name that had a credit history, a mailing address, and 11 years of tax filings behind it, none of which belonged to anybody real. Vance had 2 people on the same aircraft and 4 more waiting at the far end. Boone had driven her to the terminal himself and had not said a single word for the last 15 minutes of it, and when she got out, he'd finally managed one. "Commander." She'd stopped with her hand on the door. "You come back," he said. "Same as before. Not an order. I've got no rank on you, and we both know it. Just come back." And Ren Calloway had looked at a 63-year-old range chief who had known what she was before anyone else on that base and had chosen when it cost him something to say it out loud in front of an admiral. "I will," she said. Slade was in the terminal. I was exactly where the museum asset had said he would be, and he was doing exactly what a career officer does when he is trying very hard to look like a man with nowhere pressing to be. He had a coffee he wasn't drinking. He had a newspaper he wasn't reading. He had positioned himself with his back to a structural column and a clear view of 2 exits, which was the single most military thing a person could do in a room full of civilians, and was Vance's people reported dryly visible from 100 feet. He had checked no bag. That detail was the one Wren spent the whole flight thinking about. A man traveling to a Senate session checks a bag. A man who intends to still be in this country in a week checks a bag. Warren Slade had 4 years of planning and a personal account and an escort credential, and he had walked into a terminal with 1 carry-on, which meant that whatever the credential was for it was not the beginning of anything. It was an ending. She landed at 23:11 Eastern and did not go to the hotel Vance had arranged. She went to the terminal. He saw her at 0642 the next morning. She had not slept. She had spent 6 hours in a 24-hour concourse coffee place in civilian clothes with her hair down for the first time in 2 days reading a paperback. She never turned a page in waiting for a man to come back through a set of doors. Because the one thing she knew about Warren Slade that Slade did not know she knew was that he had a 0900 escort appointment and a lifetime habit of arriving 3 hours early to everything. He came through at 0641. He was 10 feet past her when something in his peripheral vision snagged, and he stopped walking and he turned around. Wren looked up from the paperback, and she watched a 28-year career come apart in a man's face in stages. The way a building comes down, a shudder first, then a settling, then the whole thing going at once. "No," Slade said. She closed the book. "Sit down, Colonel." I didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of a concourse at 0642 with a coffee in one hand and a bag in the other, and he did not move for 11 seconds, and Ren let him have all 11. Because everything she needed from him was going to be manufactured in those seconds and not in anything she said afterward. "You're dead," he said finally. Everybody keeps opening with that. "You died in—" He stopped himself. He actually stopped himself mid-sentence with the reflex of a man who has spent 6 years never saying certain nouns in public places. "There was a report. There was a report, Commander. There was. I read it." "So did I," she said. "It was thorough. Vance wrote it himself." And Boone would hear the recording of this later, all of it, every second, because Vance's people had 2 directional microphones on that concourse, and a court would eventually hear it too. And what he heard on the tape at that exact moment was a sound he had trouble identifying and had to play 4 times and then understood was Warren Slade putting his coffee down on a table because his hand was no longer reliable. He sat. "You've been alive the whole time," he said. 14 months of it mattered. 14, his eyes moved. Boone could hear him doing it on the tape, the small changes in breath as a man ran a calendar backward. 14 months, the audit, the Baltimore transfer, He stopped again. "That was you. Colonel, I'm going to save you about 20 minutes. She set the paper back down. "I have the financial architecture. I have 6 years of shell layering, every intermediary, the account in Nicosia, and the 2 feeding it. I have the communications infrastructure, including the parallel channel you people built, because you didn't trust military systems, which was the smartest thing you ever did, and also the reason I found you." She paused. "And as of 11 hours ago, I have a signed federal statement from Lieutenant Cole Ashford describing a conversation he had with you 79 days ago about his wife and his daughters." Slade said nothing. "His girls are 8 and 11, Ren said. "Ella and Ruth, I want you to hear their names out loud, once from somebody who isn't threatening them." "I never threatened." "You said their safety was something you thought about often. That is not a threat." "Colonel," she leaned it forward maybe 4 inches. "You are a 28-year officer sitting in an airport talking to a woman you filed a casualty report on. Let's not spend our remaining time together on the position that it wasn't a threat." The tape recorded 8 seconds of nothing. Then Slade said very quietly, "What do you want?" "I want you to stand up and walk out of this terminal with me." "And then what?" "And then you talk to Director Vance for 4 hours, and after that you talk to federal prosecutors for considerably longer, and somewhere in there a lawyer arrives and starts doing his job." She held his eyes. "That's it. That's the whole offer. I don't have a deal in my pocket, Colonel. I'm not authorized to give you one, and I wouldn't insult you by pretending otherwise." "Then why would I go anywhere with you?" "Because in about 2 hours, you're supposed to stand next to a sitting United States senator in a building full of cameras," Ren said. "And I don't think you've worked out yet that he's not expecting you." Slade went completely still. "Ah," she said, "there it is." She let it sit. That was the thing Vance said afterward in a debrief that Kessler was not cleared for and it attended anyway. She had him at, "He's not expecting you." And instead of pressing, she picked up her coffee and let a 54-year-old colonel sit in an airport and do arithmetic he had been refusing to do for 3 months. "You signed out under a training authorization that doesn't exist," she said eventually. "You had 4 hours. You didn't use them to leave the country, and you have a route. You've had it since the day you got scared. And I know roughly what it cost because I built one myself once." She set the cup down. "You used them to get to him." Why, Slade's jaw was working. "You wanted to be standing next to him," she said. "In public. On a day with cameras. Because you'd finally understood that the network had run out of moves and the only asset you had left was being visibly his." "That's not—" "You were buying insurance," she said. "You thought if you were in the frame, he couldn't cut you loose. And I'm telling you, Colonel, as somebody who has spent 14 months inside that man's money, he cut you loose 11 days ago." The recording caught it. A single syllable, half a breath, nothing anybody could transcribe. "11 days ago," she said. "An instruction moved through the intermediary structure, reducing your access tier. You wouldn't have seen it. It doesn't come down. It goes sideways. Your authorizations on 3 of the 7 contracts were quietly reassigned to a man in Norfolk who has no idea what he's holding." She paused. "You've been operationally decommissioned for a week and a half, and you flew across a country to stand next to the person who did it." Slade put both hands flat on the table. "You're lying. I'm the only person in your life right now who has no reason to." You have every reason you want me to talk. Colonel, her voice didn't change. I don't need you to talk. I have Ashford's statement. I have 6 years of financial architecture, and I have a contract asset in federal custody in Arizona who gave me your itinerary in 30 seconds. I have enough to close this without one word from you. She let a beat go by. What I don't have is you telling a prosecutor what he said in a room. That's the only thing left in the world that belongs to you. And in about 90 minutes, it's going to stop being worth anything. Because once he knows we've moved everything you could have offered, becomes something he can explain. He'll say I acted alone. He will say, you acted alone, Wren agreed. He'll say it well. He's very good. And he's been building the character for a decade, the accountability man, the reform man, the man who goes after procurement. There isn't a defense attorney in that city who wouldn't take that case for free. She leaned back. And you'll be a colonel with a foreign account and a dead admiral you don't have. Slade's head came up. Kessler's alive, she said, in case you were waiting for a phone call about a vehicle failure on a highway outside Blackthorn. A pause. That was a good plan, incidentally. It would have worked. Nobody would have looked twice. She watched the last thing go out of him. Boone, listening to the tape 3 weeks later, said the sound Slade made at that point was not a word and not a sob. It was the noise a man makes when the final wall he was standing behind turns out to have been drawn on paper. How long have you known about me? Slade said. Personally, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He laughed one ugly, exhausted note. 6 weeks and you came to Arizona and let an admiral throw your rifle in the dirt in front of 30 officers. Yes. Why? And Wren Calloway said the thing that Vance would later describe as the most efficiently brutal sentence he had ever heard in an operational context. Because none of you look for a woman who lets that happen to her, she said. You look for the one who fights back. Slade stood up at row 709. He walked out of that terminal beside her, through a set of doors, into a federal vehicle, and it was so unremarkable that 100 people watched it and none of them registered a single thing. There was no scene. There was no restraint. There was a colonel in civilian clothes and a young woman with her hair down, walking at a normal pace, and the entire thing took 40 seconds. He talked for 6 hours and 20 minutes. And what came out of Warren Slade in that room did not just close the case. Wren Calloway had spent 14 months building. It opened 2 more underneath it that even Vance had not known were their names. Dates 3 in-person meetings Slade had personally staffed in the specific architecture of how a sitting member of the Senate Armed Services Committee had spent 5 years positioning himself as the loudest voice for defense procurement reform in Washington while routing the substance of that reform to men who sold it. He said the name at 1104. Vance stopped writing. The 2 federal prosecutors in the room stopped writing. And Wren, sitting against the wall where she had been sitting for 6 hours saying almost nothing, looked at the far side of the room and did not react at all, because it was a name she had carried privately for 11 days and had told exactly one person, and she had needed to hear it come out of Slade's mouth in front of witnesses before she was allowed to believe it was real. Are you certain? One of the prosecutors said. I've got wire records, Slade said. I've got 3 meetings I set up myself. I've got a phone I never wiped because I'm not stupid and I always knew this ended in a room. He looked up and his face was gray. It goes back 5 years, and there are 2 civilian contractors above him that I only ever met once. The room went very quiet. Vance stepped outside to make a call, and when he came back in, his expression had changed, not shaken because Vance did not shake, but recalibrated in the way of a man who has just made a phone call that will define the next several months of his professional life and has already made peace with it. DOJ and the Bureau are being briefed now, he said. Coordinated action on a sitting member requires a great deal more than what happened in Arizona this morning, and it's going to take weeks. He looked at Wren. But it's moving, it's real, and it's not going to be lost in procedure. They took the 6 remaining nodes at 1340 Eastern simultaneously across 4 installations. Vance had spent 8 months building the logistics of that 40-minute window people authorizations. Legal frameworks all sequenced so that 7 men in 4 locations could be in federal custody before any one of them could reach another and before a single contingency protocol could be triggered. 3 went cleanly at secondary locations off base. 2 went at their desks. The 6th was at Camp Blackthorn, and Kessler insisted on being in the room, and Boone, who by that point had been given a chair in a briefing, he had no clearance for and had stopped pretending. Otherwise watched a rear admiral sit across from a man he'd known 11 years, a man who'd carried his sleeping son to a car in 2019 and say 4 words, "Don't make it worse." And the man had put his hands flat on the table and asked for a lawyer, and it was over in 90 seconds. And Kessler sat alone in that room for half a minute afterward with his face in his hands, not breaking down, not falling apart, just taking 30 seconds to be a human being instead of an admiral, because 30 seconds was what was available, and he had learned a long time ago to take what was available. Wren called Ashford at 1512 from a quarter in Washington. "They're home," he said before she'd finished the first word. His voice was wrecked in a completely different way than the day before. "Torres brought them in an hour ago. Ruth won't let go of my leg. Ella asked if she could have a friend over." "Good." "Commander did Cole." He stopped. "Say it fast," she said, "because if you make a speech, I'm going to hang up." He laughed. It came out broken, and he didn't care. "I put my hands on you," he said, "in front of 30 people. I grabbed your arm." "You did?" "I've been trying to figure out how to apologize for 18 hours and everything I come up with sounds obscene." Wren was quiet for a second. "Then don't," she said. "Go be at home. That's the version I want." Jim. She flew back to Arizona on a military aircraft 2 days later because Kessler ordered her to and because Vance, to her open irritation, agreed with him. The base was quiet when she got in, but not dark. Boone was standing outside the operations center, which she had expected, because 11 years on that installation had made the man constitutionally incapable of going to bed, while something unresolved was still moving. He looked at her when she got out. "Well done." He nodded slowly. Not with surprise, with the specific satisfaction of a man whose read of a situation had been correct from the first 4 seconds, and who had chosen to trust that read at a moment when every other person present was laughing. "How high?" he said. She told him. Boone stared at the ground for a while. "Lord," he said. "Yeah. Your scores are going to have to stay in the restricted log," he said. "If this goes to prosecution, discovery's going to—" "Boone," he stopped. She looked at him with something that was entirely genuine and not operational in any part of it. "Thank you," she said, "for 3 days ago, for not laughing, for making that call, for standing at a fence line at 3 in the morning arguing with yourself about a number." He was quiet a moment. "I've run that range 11 years, he said. "I know what I'm looking at when I see it." "You knew before anybody." "I knew before I was supposed to," he said. "There's a difference." She almost smiled. He held the door open. "Admiral's inside. He's been in there 4 hours." Kessler was at the table when she came in, surrounded by the same documents that had covered it 72 hours earlier, thickened now with Vance's additions and 6 hours of transcript from a room in Washington. He looked up, and he looked at her the way a man looks at somebody when he has been running a private calculation for 4 hours and has finally arrived at a number he can live with. "Sit down, Commander." She sat. 14 months, he said. "Yes." "Alone." "Mostly. Vance provided infrastructure authorization cover when I needed it. The fieldwork was mine." Kessler turned a page without reading it. "When you went off the net 3 years ago," he said, "that wasn't the operation going wrong. Wrong. That was you going under." Wren was quiet for a moment. "Yes. On purpose." The network had identified that somebody was tracking their money. They didn't have a name. They were 4 to 6 weeks from getting one. She paused. "If I'd stayed visible in any capacity, any at all, they'd have found me and everything I'd built would have died in a file. So I made a different choice." "You chose to be dead." "I chose to be invisible," she said. "There's a difference. Dead means finished. Invisible means you can keep working." Kessler put the page down. And then he asked her something that was not operational and not tactical and had nothing to do with any of it. The question of a man who had spent 4 hours in a room by himself, finally processing what 3 years of a declared death actually cost the person who lives inside it. "Were you alone the whole time?" Something moved across her face, very brief, very human, gone almost before it arrived. "Yes." He nodded once and didn't push and didn't offer sympathy because her posture and the flatness of that single word had made it clear she hadn't said it to be comforted. She'd said it because it was true and he'd asked, and she was finished lying about things that no longer required lying about. "How old are you?" Kessler said. 25, sir." 25. He exhaled through his nose. I was 25 once. I was a very confident idiot at 25. Most people are. Most people get to be. He looked at her directly. You didn't. She didn't answer that. Kessler stood up. He straightened his uniform with the automatic precision of a man who had been wearing one for 31 years, and he looked at Ren Calloway across a table in a covered window briefing room at 341 in the morning. Stand up, Commander, she stood. On behalf of this installation and every officer on it, he said, I want to acknowledge what you do in, not what the reports are going to say, not what the testimony establishes, what you actually did. He paused. 3 years operating in total isolation. 14 months building a case nobody knew existed. Coming back to a base where the first thing that happened to you was a flag officer throwing your rifle in the dirt and threatening to have you arrested. Admiral, I'm not finished. She stopped. You could have come in differently, Kessler said. You could have walked through that gate with Vance beside you and your credentials in your hand and 14 months of evidence under your arm, and you could have made every man who laughed at you feel exactly as small as he deserved to feel. His jaw tightened, and you chose not to. You came in quiet and you let it happen because quiet was what the mission required and your pride wasn't invited. The room was silent. That, he said, into the definition of a soldier, and I have never in 31 years watched anybody do it better. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and set something on the table between them. Rank insignia, not new, not fresh, out of a commissary case. The worn insignia of somebody's actual service. She understood immediately without being told that they were his. I know you have your own, Kessler said. I know they're in a file somewhere that's about to be restored, and I know that's the right way for it to happen. But these are mine, and I'd like you to hold them until the paperwork catches up. Ren looked at the insignia. She thought about a morning 3 days ago. 30 men laughing, a rifle in the dirt, a voice saying, get off my range before I have you arrested for impersonating a soldier. She thought about Boone, who had known. She thought about a lieutenant in a storage room saying a name out loud that cost him everything he had left. She thought about a girl in a group of 22 arguing about the moons of Saturn. She reached out and picked them up. She held them in her hand for a moment. Then she set them back down on the table. Keep them, sir, she said. You earned yours. I'll get mine back the way it's supposed to happen. Kessler looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not expected at all. He saluted her. Clean, precise, the full formal salute of a rear admiral given to a lieutenant commander at 341 in the morning with no audience, no ceremony, and nobody to see it except a range chief standing in a doorway who had not been invited and had come anyway. She returned it. And Elias Boone, watching from that doorway, understood that in 11 years on that installation, he had never seen anything more honest happen in that building. 6 weeks later, Kessler testified. It went 11 hours. It was not the testimony anyone had scheduled, not the polite session about contract irregularities that a network of career officers had decided was worth killing a man over. It was something much larger, a documented account of institutional corruption, legislative penetration, classified information theft, and coordinated cover-up that would reshape military oversight policy for a decade. Ren was not in that hearing room. She was 3 floors below, it giving her own testimony to a separate panel, the full account on record of 14 months of invisible work and 3 years of an existence the official file had recorded as ended. She answered every question. She held nothing back. When it was finished and the panel chair thanked her, she said one sentence. The mission is complete, sir. She meant it in every sense the words had. 2 days after that, Vance met her in a corridor and handed her a file. Her file. Restored. Every service year, every qualification, every commendation that had been suspended when a casualty report was signed 3 years earlier. All of it reinstated, accurate and complete. She opened it. Lieutenant Commander Ren Calloway. Her name, her rank, her record. Real again. She closed it. What now? Vance said. And she told him. He raised an eyebrow, and then he raised the other one, and then he said, say that again. Boone's got an opening on his range staff, Ren said. He told me 3 weeks ago. Said he needed somebody who understood the difference between teaching people to shoot and teaching people to think. Vance stared at her. You want to be a range instructor? For a while. Commander. Director. She looked at him directly. I've been a weapon for a long time. I was a good one. I don't regret a minute of it. But I'm 25 years old and I've been declared dead, and I've spent 3 years alone in the dark, and I have earned the right to decide what I am next. A pause. I want to be on a range. I want to watch people learn what it actually means to think under pressure instead of just react to it. I want to be useful in a way that doesn't require me to disappear. Vance was quiet for a long moment. All right, he said. Don't all right me like I asked permission. All right, he said again, and this time there was nothing managerial in it at all. It was simply the response of one person who has worked beside another through something serious and come out the other end and is now figuring out what the other end looks like. He put out his hand. She shook it. Phew. She flew back to Arizona that afternoon. Boone was on the range when she walked onto it, her range now with her name in the access log and her rank restored in her record reel. He looked up. He wasn't surprised. He'd been expecting it, and he was glad to see it anyway. How'd it go? 11 hours of his, then 6 of mine, then paperwork. And now I'm here. He handed her a clipboard. Tomorrow's schedule, he said. First group at 0700. Basic long-range qualification. He paused. Most of them think they already know what they're doing. Ren took the clipboard. She looked at the schedule. Then she looked down the lane past every marker all the way to the far stakes at 1,800 meters, where 50 out of 50 had gone into the center of 10 targets on a morning when 30 decorated officers had laughed themselves sick at a woman with nothing on her collar. I'll be here at 0600, she said. Boone nodded and went back to his station. And Ren Calloway stood alone on a range in Arizona with a clipboard in her hand, and the wind flags moved away. Wind flags always move, never settling, never staying, always demanding to be read again from the beginning by somebody willing to resist the comfort of yesterday's calculation. She breathed in for 4 counts, held for 4, out for 4. Then a vehicle came through the gate behind her at a speed nobody drives on a base, and Boone stood up out of his chair, and Ren turned around, and the man who got out was not from Camp Blackthorn, and he was not in uniform, and he was holding a sealed envelope with her name on it in handwriting she recognized. Vance's handwriting. She had spoken to Vance 4 hours ago. He had not mentioned an envelope. The man crossed 40 meters of open ground and stopped in front of her, and Boone was already moving down the line, and Ren put a hand up without turning her head, and Boone stopped. Commander Calloway, who are you? Nobody you need to know. He held out the envelope. Director Vance said to tell you he didn't want this coming over a phone. She took it. She didn't open it. When did he give you this? 4 days ago. Ren's head came up. 4 days, which meant Vance had written it before the quarter, before the handshake, before the all right that hadn't been managerial. He had been carrying it in a drawer sealed in his own handwriting while he asked her what she wanted to do next and listened to her say she wanted to teach. He said if you were going to say what he thought you'd say, you should get it after, the man said, not before. Then he walked back to the vehicle and drove out through the gate, and Ren Calloway stood on her own range holding an envelope, and Boone came down the line and stopped 6 feet away and had the good sense not to say anything at all. She opened it. There was 1 page inside. Vance did not use 2 pages for anything. She read it once. Then she read it again more slowly, and Boone watched her face and got exactly nothing off it for the first 11 seconds, and then got everything at once. Ma'am, she folded the page. Slade's cooperation triggered a review, she said. Every operation in the last 6 years the network had visibility on. Vance had a team walking it backward. And 3 years ago, there were 7 men in a valley in the Hindu Kush. Her voice was flat and careful the way voices go when the person is holding something at arm's length on purpose. Their exfiltration route was compromised. They had about 20 minutes. Somebody called in alternate coordinates, and all 7 of them walked out. That was you. That was me. She looked at the page in her hand. The report I read afterward, the one Vance wrote, the one that declared me dead, said all 7 made it to the extraction point. Boone felt his stomach go. 6 made it to the extraction point. Ren said 1 didn't. The range was very quiet. The 7th man was taken, she said. Not killed, taken. And the network moved him twice in 11 days, and then he stopped moving, and he has been in the same place for 3 years. And the reason it never surfaced in any file is that the men who knew were the same men I've spent 14 months putting in federal custody. Boone put his hand on the rail of the firing line because his knees had made a decision without consulting him. He's alive. Vance believes so. Believes. Vance doesn't write believes unless he means 80%. She folded the page again and put it in her pocket. His name is Petty Officer First Class Daniel Kahn. He was 23. He'd been in 4 years. A pause. He has a mother in Ohio who has spent 3 years believing her son died on a mountain because that is what the Navy told her, because that is what the report said, and the report was written by a man who was given bad information by people who were selling it. Boone said very quietly, "Does she know, has anybody? Nobody knows anything yet. That's the point of the envelope." She turned and looked at him, and Elias Boone, who had spent 3 days learning to read a face that had been built specifically to be unreadable, saw the whole thing land on her at once. Not grief, not shock, guilt. Enormous structural load-bearing guilt, arriving from a direction she had never once thought to defend. "I counted 6, she said. "Ma'am, I was on a ridge with the scope, and I counted them out, and I counted 6, and I told myself the 7th was behind cover, and I moved position because I had 11 minutes before somebody found me." Her voice did not rise. That was the worst part of it. "I have replayed that night 400 times in 3 years, and not once, not one single time did I go back and count again. You had 11 minutes. I had a scope and 11 minutes, and I counted 6 men, and I decided it was 7. She looked back down the range. "That's not a mistake anybody else made for me, Senior Chief. That one's mine." She called Vance from the range office 11 minutes later and did not sit down for the entire conversation. "You wrote this 4 days ago." "I did." "You sat across from me in a corridor in Washington and asked what I wanted to do next while this was in your pocket." "It was in a drawer, and yes." Vance's voice was the same as it always was, which somehow made it worse. "Because I needed to hear what you'd say when nobody was holding a rifle to it. You've spent 3 years choosing the mission because the mission was the only thing on the table. I wanted to know what you'd choose when there was a table." "That's manipulative." "It's careful. There is overlap." A pause. "And now you know, and now you get to choose again, and this time you're choosing with your eyes open, which is the first time that's been true since you were 22. Wren stood in a range office in Arizona with her hand flat on a desk. "How solid is it?" "Solid enough that I have had a team on it for 9 days, and I haven't slept properly for 6 of them." Vance's tone shifted. "Slade gave us a movement log, 3 years of network transport authorizations he staffed personally. There's a line item 11 days after the Valley that doesn't correspond to any cargo, any personnel transfer, or any operation on any calendar. It moved from a facility in-country to a location outside the theater entirely, and the authorization signature belongs to one of the 2 civilian contractors Slade only ever met once. The ones above the senator. The ones above everybody." Wren closed her eyes. "They kept him as insurance," she said. "That's my read. A live American operator is the single most expensive thing you can hold and the single most useful. It's not leverage against the Navy. The Navy doesn't know he exists anymore. It's leverage against each other." A pause. "Whoever holds Khan holds the thing that ends every other man in that structure. It's not a hostage. It's a receipt. And the men holding the receipt just watch 7 of their nodes get taken in a 40-minute window." "Yes." "Which means he stops being an asset and starts being a liability sometime in the next days," Vance said, "not weeks." Wren opened her eyes. "I need to be on a plane." "You need to hear the rest first," Vance said, "because there is a part of this you're going to hate, and I'd rather you hate it here than in a hangar." The part she hated was this. There was no location. There was a movement log, a signature, and a 9-day analytical reconstruction that narrowed a continent down to a region, and a region down to about 400 square kilometers, and 400 square kilometers is not an address. Vance had 2 people working it and a third arriving. He had a probability model and no door to kick, and there was exactly 1 human being alive who could close that gap. "Slade," Wren said. "Slade staffed the transport. He doesn't know what was in it. He's already said so under oath 4 separate ways, and I believe him because he'd give it to me if he had it. He's got nothing left to sell." Vance paused. "But he knows the pattern. He knows how those 2 contractors move things they don't want moved twice. He spent 6 years watching it." "Then ask him." "I have, twice." Another pause. "He won't." Wren went very still. Say that again. He'll talk about the senator all day. He'll talk about money for a week. He gave us the whole architecture inside 6 hours and he hasn't slowed down. Vance's voice went flat. The one thing he won't discuss is transport patterns for those two men. He shut down both times and asked for his attorney, and the second time he actually apologized to me, which I've never seen him do. Why, Buenin? Because he's afraid of them in a way he was never afraid of us. Wren stood in that office for a long moment. Then I'll go ask him. Commander. Director. Her voice did not rise. Warren Slade sat in an airport and told me he'd read the report I was declared dead in. He gave you 6 hours because a woman he'd buried sat down across from him with a paperback in her hand. A pause. He's not afraid of you. He's not afraid of a prosecutor. But he is specifically and personally afraid of me. And that is a resource, and I am not going to be delicate about using it while a 26-year-old man sits in a room somewhere counting his third year. Vance was quiet for 4 seconds. There's a flight out of Luke at 2140. He said, she told Boone in the range office at 1620, and he did not say a single word for about 8 seconds. Then he said, you've been back on this range 4 hours. I know. You've got a clipboard with tomorrow's schedule on it. I know. 0600, Boone said. You told me 0600. Wren looked at him, and something in her face was not operational at all. Senior Chief, she said, there's a woman in Ohio who has a folded flag in a case. Boone put both hands on his desk and looked at them. Yeah, he said. All right. I'll be back. You said that at the terminal. And I came back. He nodded slowly. He picked up the clipboard she'd set down and looked at it and set it down again. I'll cover the 0700 group, he said. Basic long-range qual, 12 of them. Most of them think they already know what they're doing. He looked up. I'm not filling your slot, Commander. I'm covering it. There's a difference, and I want it understood. Understood. Good. He cleared his throat once roughly. Now get off my range. She almost smiled, and she went, Kessler was waiting at the vehicle. She hadn't told him. Boone had 40 seconds after she'd walked out on a radio in violation of about 4 things. Commander? Sir? You're going after him. Yes, sir. Kessler stood there with his hands behind his back, and Wren watched a 31-year officer run a calculation he did not have the authority to act on and do it anyway. When I testify to the closed session next month, he said, I'm being asked about the Hindu Kush. It's in the packet. Somebody on that committee wants it walked through. He looked at her. I've been dreading it for 2 weeks because I don't know the operation and I'd be reading somebody else's report into a record. Sir, if you bring that man home, Kessler said, I will read that into the record in a closed session under oath in front of people who will not be able to unhear it. And every family in this country who has been handed a report by an institution that got it wrong will have one documented example of the institution going back to check. Wren didn't say anything. That's not a favor, Kessler said. That's the only thing I've got that's worth anything to you, and I'm putting it on the table. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, sir, she said. Warren Slade had aged 4 years and 6 weeks. He came into the interview room in a federal facility with his attorney beside him and his hands folded, and he saw who was sitting on the other side of the table and stopped in the doorway. No, he said. Sit down, Colonel. I've told them everything. He sat because his legs did it for him. Ask them. 6 hours and then 4 more and then a day with the prosecutors, and I have not held back one, Daniel Cohn. Slade stopped talking. His attorney said something about the scope of the cooperation agreement, and Wren did not look at him and did not respond to him, and after a moment the attorney stopped talking too because she had not raised her voice once, and the room had somehow gotten smaller anyway. 23 years old, Wren said, 4 years in. 7 men went into that valley and 6 came out, and I have spent 3 years thinking I got all of them. Commander, you staffed the transport Warren. He flinched at his own first name. I staffed hundreds of transports. I have said this. I did not know what was in it. I did not ask what was in it. I have never in 6 years asked what was in Hamon. I know. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking what was in it. I'm asking how those 2 men moved something they don't want moved twice. And Warren Slade's face closed like a door. I want to speak with my attorney. You've spoken with your attorney. I'm invoking, Colonel. Wren put both hands flat on the table. Look at me. He didn't. Look at me. He looked. You have already lost everything, she said. 28 years, your rank, your pension, the version of your life where your grandchildren look you up and find a decorated officer. It's gone. It went the morning I sat down in that concourse, and you knew it before you finished your coffee. A pause. There is exactly one thing left on this earth that could still go on the other side of the ledger, and it is walking a man out of a room he's been in for 3 years. Slade's jaw moved. You don't understand what those two men are. Then explain it. They are not military, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. They are not officers who went bad. They don't have careers to lose or oaths they broke or families who will be ashamed. They are two men with money who have been buying access for 20 years. And the reason I gave you a senator without blinking, and I will not give you them, is that the senator can only ruin me. He stopped. His hands were shaking on the table. There is a place my sister lives. There is a place my daughter works. I have thought about both of those places every single day since 2019, and I have never once said them out loud. The room was silent. Ren sat back. His mother's name is Ruth Cohn, she said quietly. Slade closed his eyes. She lives outside Dayton. She's 58. She got a folded flag and a report in a chaplain in her living room 3 years ago, and she has spent every day since building a life on the other side of a fact that isn't true. Ren's voice did not change at all. In about 4 days, the men you're protecting are going to make that fact true because their receipt has become a witness. Don't. Say the pattern, Colonel. Don't. You threatened a lieutenant's daughters, Ren said. 8 and 11. You did it in a scheduling meeting in the same voice you'd used to discuss maintenance rotations, and then you went home and slept, and you did it because you were afraid of exactly the two men you're sitting here being afraid of right now. Slade put both hands over his face. And I am telling you, she said, as the only person in this building who has ever been inside their money, the thing they threatened you with is the thing you did to somebody else, and you get to decide one time in the next 30 seconds whether that's the last true sentence about you or the second to last. Nobody in that room breathed. Then Warren Slade took his hands off his face, and his attorney said his name once, and Slade said, "Shut up, Marcus." And he talked for 51 minutes. Wow. It wasn't an address. He never had one. What he had was 6 years of watching two men move things, and the pattern he gave Vance's analysts closed 400 square kilometers down to 11 possible sites in under 2 days, and then down to 3, and then at 0340 on the fourth morning on the strength of a utility draw at a property that had no business drawing that much power down to 1. Ren was not on the entry. That was Vance's call, and Kessler backed it, and she fought both of them for 90 minutes and lost, and the reason she lost was that the site was outside the country, and the entry was a joint task with 2 agencies in a foreign service. And there was no version of the paperwork where a Navy lieutenant commander who had been legally dead until 6 weeks ago went through that door. She sat in a room 1,100 miles away with a headset on and listened. It took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She heard the entry call. She heard 9 seconds of nothing. She heard somebody say clear 4 times in 4 different voices, and then she heard nothing for 22 seconds, which was the longest 22 seconds of her life, including every one she had spent on a ridge in the Hindu Kush. Then a voice came up on the net and said, "We have a person." Ren did not move. Male, adult, responsive. A pause and the voice changed. It went unsteady in a way trained voices do not go unsteady. He stand by. 11 seconds. He gave us his name, the voice said. He gave us his name and his rate and his service number, and then he asked what year it is. Ren Calloway put her forehead down on the table in a room 1,100 miles away and did not lift it for some time. They flew him to Germany first and then home. She did not meet the aircraft. Vance offered and she said no, and when he asked why she said something, he repeated exactly once afterward and never again. Because I'm not what he needs to see. I'm the person who counted 6. Kessler flew to Ohio instead in uniform on his own time without a press officer. Ruth Cohn opened her front door to a rear admiral she had never met, and Kessler said the sentence he had rehearsed on the entire flight and got 2 words into it before it stopped being a rehearsed sentence at all. "Mrs. Cohn," he said, "your son is alive. We were wrong. I am so deeply sorry, and he is alive and he is coming home." He stayed 4 hours. He told her the truth about the report, the network, and the men who had sold it because Vance had cleared him too, and because Kessler would have told her regardless. He drank a cup of coffee in a kitchen with a folded flag in a case on the shelf behind him, and he did not once look away from her. When he left, she asked him one question at the door. "The person who found him," she said. "Somebody went and looked. After 3 years, somebody checked." Kessler stood on that porch for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Somebody checked." Daniel Cohn asked to see her 11 weeks later when he was ready, which is a word that meant something specific and hard and that nobody rushed. He was 26 now. He was thin in a way that had nothing to do with training. He sat down across from Ren Calloway in a quiet room at a facility in Maryland and looked at her for a while before either of them said anything. "You're her," he said. "I'm her." "The coordinates." His voice was rough, 3 years of not using it much. "On the ridge, that was you." "Yes." "6 of them got out." "Yes." Daniel Cohn nodded slowly. "I used to think about that," he said, "in there a lot, because I figured whoever made that call thought they got in all 7, and I figured they were probably sleeping fine, and I decided that was okay." He looked at his hands. "I decided I'd rather one person slept fine than nobody did." Ren did not answer that for a moment. "I didn't sleep fine," she said. "No," he looked up. "I can see that." The room was quiet. "I counted 6, Ren said. "I want you to hear that from me and not from a report. I had a scope 11 minutes, and I counted 6 men, and I told myself it was 7, and I moved position, and I have carried that since somebody put your name in front of me." Daniel Cohn was quiet for a long time. "Ma'am," he said, "can I say something?" "Yes." "You didn't put me in that room." His voice was very steady. 6 years of men in offices put me in that room. A colonel signed a transport, and a senator took money, and 2 guys with a lot of money decided I was a piece of paper they might need someday. He leaned forward. "You're the only person in the entire United States government who went back and counted again. 3 years later, when nobody asked you to, and everybody had a file that said you didn't have to." Ren didn't say anything. "So with respect," Daniel Cohn said, "I'm not going to sit here and watch you take that one. That one's not yours." The prosecutions ran 19 months. The senator resigned before indictment and was indicted anyway. Both civilian contractors were arrested inside a 6-hour window, and the second one was taken at an airport by federal agents while attempting to board an aircraft with a bag he had packed 4 years earlier, which Vance mentioned to Ren exactly once dryly, and she did not laugh but came close. Warren Slade received a sentence that his attorney called excessive and that Slade himself did not appeal. He gave one interview from custody years later and was asked what broke him, and he said a woman he had helped declare dead sat down across from him in an airport with a paperback in her hand. Cole Ashford was not charged. Vance presented the coercion in full context on record in every proceeding where his name appeared and the committee heard it and the Navy heard it and Ashford stayed in uniform. He requested a transfer he did not get and then stopped requesting it. He kept the letter Ren sent his daughters. Ella framed hers. Kessler testified to the closed session in November and read the Hindu Kush into the record under oath exactly as he had promised on a parking apron in Arizona and did not stop when a member of the committee tried to move him along, and the transcript of that exchange became eventually the reason for a review process that changed how the Navy confirms a casualty when the intelligence supporting it comes from a compromised source. 9 other families got a knock on a door in the 4 years that followed. 2 of them got the same sentence Ruth Cohn had gotten. Ren Calloway went back to Arizona. She was at the range at Wo 554 on a Tuesday in March, 16 months after a rifle had gone into the dirt on that same line, and Boone was already there because Boone was always already there. He handed her a clipboard without looking up. 0700 group, he said. 14 of them, 2 are officers. How bad? One of them asked me yesterday what the qualification record on this range is. Ren looked at the schedule. What did you tell him? I told him it's in a restricted log and he doesn't have the clearance. Boone finally looked up and there was something dangerously close to enjoyment in his face. He asked who said it. And I told him she'll be teaching his class. Ren almost smiled. At 0700, she stood in front of 14 shooters, 12 enlisted, 2 officers, one of whom had a look on his face she recognized so precisely that she had to take a second before she started. She was 27. Honey gold hair pulled back, olive shirt, camouflage trousers, sleeves rolled to just below the elbow, Where a scope reticle, in a number, in a word, nobody in the class was cleared to know, sat quietly on the inside of her left forearm and were not mentioned. Before we do anything, she said, I want a show of hands. Who here thinks they already know how to shoot? 9 hands went up. Good, Ren said. That's the most honest this class is going to be all day. She walked the line. Here's the only thing I'm going to teach you that matters, she said. Everything else is math and you can learn math. The thing that matters is this: the wind you shoot in is not the wind you looked at. It has already moved. It moved while you were feeling good about your reading. She stopped at the end of the line, which means every single time from the beginning, you have to be willing to throw away the answer you liked and look at what's actually there. She turned around. That applies to about 4 things on this range, she said, and about 400 things off it. Then she put them on the line. And at 0946 that morning, one of the 2 officers, the one with the look on his face, missed at 600 meters, and Soren turned around and said with the specific irritation of a man who has decided the instructor is the problem, Ma'am, with respect, have you actually shot this range? The whole line went quiet. Boone, 40 feet away at his station, did not look up. He picked up his coffee and took a drink and set it down and did not look up. Ren Calloway looked at the young lieutenant for a moment. Once or twice, she said, get back on your rifle. She stayed on that range for 6 years. She was never famous. Her scores stayed in a restricted log, and the story stayed inside a closed session and a handful of sealed transcripts. And the only people who knew the whole of it were an admiral, a director, a range chief, a lieutenant who kept a framed letter, a woman outside Dayton, and a petty officer first class who eventually went back to work. 941 shooters came through her classes. Every single one of them was taught on the first morning that the answer you liked is the most dangerous thing you will carry onto a range. And that being underestimated is not an insult, but a position, and that a person's worth has never once in the history of the world been printed on their collar. Because 30 decorated officers stood on a range in Arizona and laughed at a woman with nothing on her uniform, and not one of them knew that she had already been dead for 3 years and that she had come back anyway, and that she had come back not for a rank or a record or an apology, but because 7 men had walked into a valley and only 6 had walked out, and somebody finally had to go back and count again.